A flexible workspace is the highest level, and think of that as including all providers that combine people, place, and technology into a single bundled service and provide it with a highly flexible service agreement as opposed to a long-term lease. That would include business centers, co-working centers, incubators, accelerators, culinary centers now, media centers. It's that combination of people, place, and technology with a highly flexible service agreement to support it. And there are about 45,000 such facilities around the world today.
Welcome to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals who work with investors, buyers, and sellers of commercial real estate coast to coast. Whether you're an investor, broker, lender, property manager, attorney, or accountant, we're here to learn from the experts.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network CREPN Radio, episode number 254. Thanks for joining us. My name is J. Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Let's get into the show.
Today, my guest is Frank Cottle. Frank is a futurist based in Southern California. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Frank about the future of commercial real estate. But first, a quick reminder, if you like the show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, you can share, and you can subscribe. And as always, we'd love to see your comments. So if you feel inclined, please leave a comment. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. And you can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And also, please consider subscribing there as well. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Frank. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Thank you, Darren. Really great to be here. And I don't want to add disappointment to your program right now, but if you want to see how handsome I am, you probably ought to look at a picture of me 40 years ago.
I'm always humored by the guest response to that, but no, it's all in fun, and trust me, you're setting the curve on the positive side there, so nothing to worry about. But Frank, before we get into our talk about the future, if you could share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Well, my career has spanned 5 decades. I started in the late 60s, early 70s as a commercial diver, of all things, working independently and also as a contractor to one of our federal agencies, doing what was termed interesting work for a few years. From there, I started racing yachts. I spent a decade racing large sailing yachts all over and working to build a yacht brokerage here on the West Coast based in Newport Beach in California. As I matured in that business a little bit, we were quite successful. We got very lucky. I made the decision that I would never be an owner so long as I was a broker. As a result of which I had to leave that part of my work, and I started in commercial real estate, 1979-80 time period. I come from a ranching and farming family, so the concept of land banking was appealing to me, buying dirt in the path of progress, if you will. But I didn't want to stay farming. I didn't want to go that route. So we would buy large parcels on the edge of master plan commercial developments sponsored by Prudential Land, Chevron Land, Mobile Land, the Trammell Crow, Boston Properties, the Irvine Company, the really big property master plan developers. And we would buy a little piece of land out there on the edge of their master plan project, the biggest piece we could buy with the most entitlement. And we'd put a small building out there, 30, 40, 50,000 foot building but we had 300, 400, 500,000 feet of entitlement rights to go up, if you will. But the timing just wasn't right. So I had to figure out a way to hold the land. And we came up with this concept in watching what was going on, that we figured out that these funny little things called executive suites generated the most revenue per square foot of anything in commercial real estate. They were fairly unknown in the late 70s, although just starting as an industry. And so we built dedicated buildings that hosted and housed shared workspace back in the late 70s and early 80s. We built that portfolio for 10 years across the southwestern US, California, Arizona, and Texas. Sold the portfolio in about 1990 and started building classic, what are referred to as business or co-working centers today. Myself and two partners, we built across the entire nation, 195 projects. We were the largest private operator in the industry at that time. And that portfolio was sold in 2000, right at the height of the dot-com boom. Good time to sell things. The reason we sold that portfolio, that I wanted to sell at least, is that I didn't like the risk exposure of the lease liabilities on the properties with landlords. Understanding real estate is a cyclical industry, and I wanted to own the customer instead of owning the centers. So we built the structure, the inventory control systems, and the technology to do that. And today we have clients in, I don't know how many, in 54 countries, about 1,100 facilities, but we don't own the facilities. We just use those facilities in much the same way that Expedia uses the hotel industry to service our customers. And it's been a real fun ride, taking us down a lot of interesting paths. And today we're considered to be one of the progenitors of the flexible workspace industry. And we still try and push the limits daily.
That's fascinating to hear you talk about that, and just thinking back about executive suites and how that was such a trend-setting concept back in its beginning there. And now you look at leased workspaces is kind of a second. People know what you mean when you co-work or God, what's the one that I'm drawing a complete blank. What's the WeWork? Is that? I think that's one of the ones in that.
Well, WeWork is kind of an interesting debacle. They grew overly fast, not paying attention to some core fundamentals, and got themselves in quite a bit of trouble. They're referred to as the biggest deflated unicorn in the history of the market. And SoftBank, who's their primary financial sponsor, has lost multiple billions and billions so far on the company, all through just too aggressive a business plan. They, again, not paying attention to the fundamentals. And one of the reasons I'm not in that business, they owned the centers, they were exposed to the leases, they had the huge capital expenses. Every time they wanted to capture another 1,000 customers, they had to build another center. And that cost them any place from 15 to 25, $30 million in the combination of CapEx and leasehold liabilities. If I want to do 1,000 customers to my model, I have to pay Google some pay-per-click and then bill them. That's it. So it's a technology-driven company in a software as a service model, servicing real estate customers as opposed to a facilities-based model. We use the facilities that are owned by others.
So are you leasing space then?
No,
it's more driving the.
We basically own the customer, and we place ourselves and our customers into other flexible workspace facilities around the world. Think of Expedia as a good example. We were around when they started, some guys from Microsoft, and knew them quite well. And if you run a hotel room from Expedia, be a Hilton or a Marriott, you have a business relationship with Expedia, not with Marriott. They collect your money. They give you the special deal. They give you the loyalty program, etc. And they have a deal, a wholesale transaction structure with Marriott, with a variety of hotels, that allows them to put you in at a discount. So you may be paying $500 for that room. Expedia is only paying $350 or $400 for that same room. And so they work on that wholesale margin where they own the customer and the business relationship. But we do the same thing with commercial real estate, utilizing the flexible workplace sector as our core inventory model. So it's very much like the hospitality structure.
Got it. So you're basically the marketing broker arm for the properties, or the landlords or the property managers. Like you said, you create the relationship with the occupant, or the tenant.
That's correct, and it's really a scenario where a lot of times people don't like to go direct. They feel they can get a better value by shopping across a platform like ours, or many times they don't want to have relationships, larger customers in particular, don't want to have relationships with 20 different service providers. They want to have one contract with one aggregated service provider that can deal across multiple currencies, multiple contracts, multiple time zones. So in our model, you can come in and you can open 10 offices in 10 countries, in 10 currencies in 10 minutes. It's very simple to do. You just drop into a website and open an office. And we can do that globally. We've been operating globally since the early 2000s. And it's a very effective structure, especially for large customers. Our largest individual customer right now has over 11,000 separate accounts with us, to put things in perspective.
You said 11,000?
Yeah, one customer.
Wow. And what's an average client, if that's an
average client in our model has about 3 to 5 offices or virtual offices, usually in multiple cities, and that's why they come to us. Again, it's much more convenient to work with a single inventory aggregator than it is with 5 companies in 5 cities that might be independently owned and operated with different types of contracts and all of different types of billing cycles, etc. Legal departments from large corporations love us because they have one contract to review, especially when they start going offshore.
Right.
That makes a big difference. And our industry is very well suited for companies that are global or international in scope. I don't know how much you know about human resources requirements in Singapore, as an example, or maybe in Egypt.
Don't know.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Usually larger companies don't either, and it's very costly for them to get into it. So they fall into our industry in general. Large providers like ourselves. Another great provider is a company called International Workplace Group. They own a brand called Regis, an excellent company also. And the larger clients and the multinationals fall to structures like us, as well as a lot of local business as well.
So do you work with Regis then? Is that one of your providers?
We like Regis. Yes, they're a fine provider. We work with them through our European offices primarily. They're headquartered in Europe, and we also have our own structure and offices and technology-based companies based in continental Europe. A company called Flexido over there that we own.
Got it. So from a user standpoint, if I've got facility needs in multiple markets, and maybe Regis isn't in those markets or whatever, and I go to you, you have contacts or relations with providers in those various markets. So I still just have the one point of contact as opposed to having to go to each market. And
that is correct. That is correct. And depending on whether we're using one of our directory structures and partnerships with various brokerages or our own internal inventory, we have between 1,100 and 18,000 different facilities that we can access around the world.
Gotcha. And as far as the so you contract with the facility provider as is it like a referral type or are you
No,
actually
we're a wholesaler.
wholesale?
We're
Okay,
a wholesale. We're a
okay,
wholesaler.
okay.
We have a predetermined contract and a predetermined discount rate with every provider that's inside of our system, and so we know exactly, what our margins are, what our costs are, et cetera. And it's again run very much in an e-commerce and software as a service type model. We have reservations and booking systems for meeting rooms, conference rooms. We have our own call centers to back up the offices with live receptionists around the world, et cetera.
Got it. So if I own an office facility and I'm looking to do some sort of what's the broad term for this type of space? Is it shared space or is it
a flexible workspace is the highest level, and think of that as including all providers that combine people, place, and technology into a single bundled service and provide it with a highly flexible service agreement as opposed to a long-term lease. That would include business centers, co-working centers, incubators, accelerators, culinary centers now, media centers. It's that combination of people, place, and technology with a highly flexible service agreement to support it. And there are about 45,000 such facilities around the world today.
Got it. So if I have a facility that I have space to lease, and is there a way to contact you, or are you one that goes out and contacts me when you have a client that has a need?
A little of both. Generally, our inventory comes to us through our industry reputation. We don't really have a big sales team that goes out there. We've been around for 40 years in this industry. So people do know who we are and what we do. And our websites are very easily accessed all over the world. So we're more of a responsive marketing team than a outreach marketing team.
Gotcha. Well, that's a interesting model, especially as space needs continue to change based on the ability to work mobile or
well, right now, think about it. Today, we've got about 1.8 billion mobile workers in the world. And look at what's happening with our current pandemic of the month, I guess I'll call it, the coronavirus. How many people have started working remotely and telecommuting just in the last 60 days globally?
Right.
Millions and millions and millions. Okay, they can do that because of technology. They can do that because all companies, all corporations, and government itself knows they have to have flexible workplace plans if they're going to win the talent war in recruitment right now, which is critically important. People are looking very much at balancing lifestyle with their work style, and so having, again, a flexible workplace plan where you can work from an office, you can work from a co-working center, you can work from Starbucks, you can work from your home. All of these things blend into a new sort of real estate 2.0 or 3.0, I guess now, approach. And our industry, the flexible work sector, is a core component to solving that mobile work issue.
Yeah, and let me ask you about just the use of space, because I mean, obviously the technology avails itself now to where literally you can work from home, you can work from the coffee shop, you can work from wherever, but the fundamental need of a space that has certain attributes, features like an office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you ever see that? Like, I mean, have you seen it change in the time you've been in engaged in this
Oh yeah,
market?
absolutely. Number one, we all need a place to work.
Mhm.
And we need a place to work where we can focus. So it's usually not the kitchen table isn't the best place. And it's certainly not Starbucks. Good coffee, bad place to work. Even though you see a lot of people with laptops in there. You see people with laptops and tablets everywhere. It's like an appendage these days.
Right.
And I'm as guilty of that as anybody.
Yeah.
But we all need places to work, and we like to work around people. Um, we as human beings, we are gregarious. We enjoy being around others and sharing with others, etc. So you have to find environments that combine the technology, which today bandwidth is like air to oxygen to all of us. We have to have massive amounts of bandwidth, and it has to be secure bandwidth. We have to have a productive workplace. It's not too far from the house because we're very environmentally conscious now, or we want it to be near public transportation station. We want to have amenities around that. I forgot about our interview this morning and didn't know it was on video, so I'm dressed because I'm going to the gym right after this. So we want to have amenities around us, good restaurants, health clubs, etc. And all of those things need to be combined into that perfect location. But most importantly, we want to be around people that we like. So when I say people, place, and technology, I'm not just talking about the support services of clerical, secretarial, administrative support that facilities provide, but I'm talking about the community of people that are working in the facility as well. Um, it, 10 years ago, people would look up an address and they'd say, oh, I want to be on that street at that address. And they would see pretty pictures of a nice facility and say, oh, that looks like a great office. Today, they'll go onto Facebook and they'll find that address. But before they really look at that location's pretty pictures, they're going to go onto Facebook and say, who's there? What's happening there? What sort of activities are going on there? And then they'll come back to the website. So the community that you surround yourself with is as important today as the facility within which you work. And that has to do with everything from communities that are focused on social responsibility and charitable structures, nonprofit structures, on up to highly technical communities where all of the most brilliant programmers from Google are going to end up doing their spare work. So that's a very important component now in office selection.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Because in one way, I feel like people have essentially isolated as much or more than ever before, but connected virtually, like what we're doing right now.
Correct.
So there is that the virtual connection, but still the physical, proximity to be in or amongst people and be able to have a community of whatever that space looks like or whatever that your requirements are. Recognize that as still being there's still some sort of a social need.
A very important aspect to that. Again, we're working remotely because we can, but today I'll be in this type of a meeting. I'll be in a workplace environment that has other people as well, and I'll be socializing. Like I say, I'll be going to the gym in an hour. So we have different patterns that we need to involve to have a balance in our lives. And it's not just sitting in a room with a headset and a microphone on 24/7.
Right.
That's a little lonely. And if you look at mental health, loneliness is an epidemic as a result of some of the technology isolation that we've used today. So having a place to go where you have a community that you enjoy being with is elemental to that work-life balance.
No, I definitely agree. And as you mentioned with uh, the coronavirus and all of its, just amazed at just how the tentacles keep reaching, and just how, like Italy currently is essentially shut down, and just this, just trying to minimize the spread. We're trying to minimize the movement of people and minimize the movement of the germs or whatever. Are you seeing any kind of an uptick in uh, space demand? Because I think like Amazon, and I know that other companies have kind of restricted travel for their employees.
Mm-hmm.
Um, has that affected your business?
We don't know yet. Because January and February were both record months. So we don't know whether it's affecting us on the positive side or whether there'll be a whiplash effect on the negative side. I think in our sector, where a lot of people use our type of space as secondary or tertiary space, a lot of large corporations do. While we're used very strategically, where people aren't in the office all day long every day. We like virtual officing. We like workstations, drop-ins, hot desking. We like all of these factors, and that seems to be part of a solution overall. If you look at large corporations and the way that their facilities are laid out with big cube farms oftentimes, or big open workspaces with a multitude of people, that's what people are trying to keep away from right now. So we aren't seeing a negative aspect, but I think it's too soon to tell whether people will just stay at their home. If so, they'll be using our call centers. So, we're fine. We're fine.
But I was even just kind of curious if not so much of a negative as a potential for a positive. A guy has, if there's a group of people in a certain region that are used to traveling, but, for the short time, or, looking not to, and they're saying, I can't work from home. I got to get, someplace. I could see that. Some sort of a
Well, we are seeing a little uptick in the hot desking, the drop-in type business right now, but it's not large enough to call it a trend reaction. We're just seeing a small uptick in that. I think for a short issue, face it, coronavirus is got a label, it's got a name, etc., but it's the flu.
Right.
We have the flu every year. And this
Right.
seems to be a little bit more virulent, and it seems to be getting a lot more press. But people go through this type of a structure every year. And so the normal reaction is you go home and work for a few days. Or you work,
Right.
you just stay away from all offices for a few days. But it doesn't seem to affect the occupancy rates or the migration in occupancy for real estate in general.
Right. Right. So we've talked a little bit about kind of the I guess from where you started to where things have evolved to. Do you have any kind of a sense of how things will continue to progress as far as this, this class of real estate and how it's used in your business?
Well, if I go back to the way it was originally used in the early 80s, we had the predominance of the clients, we refer to them as members now, were legal, accounting, financial services professionals. They were the biggest users and most stable users within the classic old style executive suite environment. That migrated to small technology companies, marketing and media companies, et cetera, coming in. But it was primarily smaller companies. In the early 2000s, the migration started shifting to larger companies. They recognized through the .com and then .bomb issues that went on in the late 90s through the early 2000s that flexibility was key. You had a lot of large companies, particularly large tech companies, that built massive campuses during the .com boom, only to have them sitting 40, 50, 60% empty 3 or 4 years later. And their balance sheets reflected a tremendous amount of debt. And that went on all over. So flexibility. And today, the CEOs and the CFOs that are running larger corporations, they're looking at their employment life cycle, which is around 7.5 years for the average employee within most large Fortune 1000 companies. And they're saying, well, our lease cycle or our debt cycles should match the life cycles of our employment base. That only makes sense. Otherwise, you've always got a lot of excess, and they're trying to carve that excess off. And one way they balance their portfolios and shed a lot of lease liability, which is debt on the balance sheet, is by utilizing our industry and running 10, 15, 20% of their employment base into flexible workspace that has a rolling 1-year contract, and that never hits their balance sheet. So they get 2 benefits. First, they win the war for talent by having a good flexible workplace program. Second, they shed debt from their balance sheet, which improves all of their valuation ratios and there's ultimately the stock price for all of their stakeholders.
Yeah, no, the balance sheet. I wonder if you could take a minute and just expand on that a little bit, because I think as most of the audience, I think just from people I've talked with and had a chance to talk with, are either investors themselves or professionals or somebody looking to get into commercial real estate. And one of the things that I don't know that it's fully understood is the value of not having that long-term lease on your balance sheet. If you're a tenant, if you have whatever your company is, can you speak a little bit to that as how they look at that and why that's a preferred?
It's a critical issue. Let's assume that I am a large technology company with an employment base in the United States of 100,000 people. And I lease on a 10-year basis my space to house and host those people. So I have a 10-year lease. Well, the first year is expensible. The years 2 through 10 are a debt. A lease is nothing but a debt instrument. I mean, it's just like a loan, right? It's just, I have an agreement, you have an agreement to provide me a certain amount of space over a specific period of time and in a contractually based on my agreement to pay you, and that contract creates a debt, and that debt becomes a liability on the balance sheet. Well, if you have extreme liability, if extreme debt on your balance sheet, you're not as good a credit to the banks. That means you're also not a good credit to the bond markets, or your stock value has more exposure and risk. So anytime you can reduce the liabilities in your balance sheet, that's a very good thing. And if you can do it simultaneously while still being able to grow, that adds flexibility and agility. We talk about what's the big term for CEOs these days? Oh, he's a real agile, or she's a real agile CEO. Well, adding agility to your business model through a more flexible workplace program and a series of 1-year rolling contracts rather than 10, 15, 20-year leases, or even a debt on owned properties, is a much more agile structure. And that creates a better stock value ultimately.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you going into that a little bit. I think the thing that's always kind of caught my attention is how I think some of these like Walgreens and these other, I think a lot of it seems like it's drugstores have gone out and built out a large footprint, everywhere. and then after the building's up and they're operating, they're looking to sell that, and the opportunity to buy in or buy or however that is, but just as somebody who looks at real estate as an asset that I'm wanting to own because I want the tenant. Sometimes you forget the flip side of that, how they view the debt and how it affects and puts kind of a drag on their performance, and how it doesn't make them as attractive too, like you said, the investors or bankers or bond market.
Sure. Well,
And
look at it's not real recently, but look at large retail models such as Sears.
yeah,
Okay, what killed Sears? Facility. They had
yeah,
massive investments in facilities, and they couldn't generate enough revenue from their retail activities to support those facilities, and ultimately that brought them down. They also didn't change to an e-commerce model. It's funny, as the first catalog sales company, they should have been the first e-commerce sales company as well, but they just didn't make it there. Kind of stuck in their own history. But that's a simple example of, that being a problem. At one point when was it? It was about in the late 90s. IBM's real estate department, actually, because of the growth of the market in general during the first phase of the dot-com era, they actually put all their leases purposefully into their balance sheet, which they didn't have to back then, but they called them an asset because they had leased space at under market values, and they were claiming the delta as an asset in their balance sheet. That kind of got wiped out by their auditors a few years later. but people have always played games with the balance sheet and real estate on both sides. From an investor's point of view, and I've owned a lot of investment properties and both the residential and commercial. Obviously, you want to buy the property, hope you have a tenant or tenant group that supports a positive cash flow. So really, your debt side is your balance sheet side is just a matter of what your courage is with leverage. Are you going to go a 90% leverage or a 0% leverage? Myself, I'm a very conservative person when it comes to debt. So I think that less is better and cash flow is good. I'm very much
Right.
a cash flow investor.
Well, definitely, there's some people that forget those good lessons every now and then, and that's why the cycle continues, I guess. So, if you were to, I guess, point anybody that was either looking into, let me ask it this way: as the world continues to get smaller from a standpoint of technology and the ability to be anywhere and work from anywhere, do you find that your type of the facilities that you guys are placing clients in, do they still tend to be in your larger metro areas, or do you find that they're going into the tertiary markets? Or
the original concept started the central business districts of major market cities. About in the late 90s, as technology started to evolve and allow more distributed work, we started seeing secondary cities come up. And today, the smallest village in Germany or Italy will have a business or a co-working center. And they're all equally successful relative to their costs. So I can build a center in Manhattan, and I know that the dirt underneath the building is very, very expensive. Okay. But I know I still need to make a certain margin. I can do the same thing in Kansas City, or the same thing in Hutchinson, Kansas, outside of Kansas City. And my margins will be about the same, maybe even a little bit better in those secondary markets. And it's all based on the cost of the dirt under the building. I mean, location has a valuation model, and you just have to deal with that. And one of the reasons we like our model, which is technology based, is that it doesn't require much of that thought process. We have a wholesale margin. We know what it is. Doesn't matter where it is. We don't have risk aside from marketing and customer management. So we've mitigated the risk through technology and by changing our business model, even though we still serve the needs of a global real estate client base.
No, it's fascinating how you guys have kind of inserted yourself in that, and how the market, I guess I'm just trying to think of, back in the day when everybody went to downtown to do work, and here we are, everybody's working. People are choosing more of their place where they want to live, and employers, like you said, are being more flexible about that, and so this demand is
that's
spreading.
really important. And I'll use our own company as an example. Our senior executive team is distributed globally. And we have a corporate headquarters here in Newport Beach officially, but it's a tiny little, we're in one of our own member buildings. We practice what we preach when it comes to flexible work. Our chief marketing officer lives in Lexington, Kentucky. He likes horses. He likes that lifestyle. That's where his family is. Can you imagine if I had to move him, or my CFO who lives in Las Vegas, or my chief administrative officer who's in Monterey, if I had to move all of them to Newport Beach, how disruptive that would be to their families, how costly it would be to the company. And I know our gentleman in Lexington, he would say, sorry, I'm going to get another job. I think each one of them would. They have families there. So the old way of centralizing a workforce was very disruptive to lifestyle and families, and very, very costly. And again, we've been working remotely like this since the 90s, and totally paperless as a company since the early 90s as well. We've always been embedded in technology, and it just makes sense for the whole team, and everybody's life cycle and lifestyle is exactly the way they want it.
No, it's fascinating just to think about it, and just think about the, historically, just the disruption, and people having to pick up and move, and all to be in a physical place, even though their work may not necessarily be local, and just the kind of the, I don't want to say the cost, but there is a cost. I mean, obviously there's a monetary cost, but just then the relationship cost and stuff, and I guess for every yin there's a yang kind of thing, but it is, I guess, the flexibility from the talent side of the equation to be able to make a choice to work for a particular company or provider or whoever, and still choose where they want to be located is it's just fascinating. I remember the first time I was meeting with a customer, and all of a sudden his laptop started making some noise. He opened it up, and he was looking at a guy from across the world, and he said, "Hold on, I'm in a meeting. Let me call you back." And I'm looking at him like, what was that? And it was basically the Jetsons right there, and it was Skype. And he was, Skype? I was like, no. And but it is fascinating just how it's really, I mean, and I don't even think that much about it. I mean, anymore. I mean, here we are on a Zoom call, and everybody's got FaceTime or whatever it is on their phones, and it just,
it's going to continue to progress. I mean, right now we're working with a couple of the larger video gaming companies. So you talk about where do things go and how does that all work? Progression in real estate. If you look at the video companies, they're starting to lose market share, not in terms of number of people, but in terms of numbers of hours, because the marketplace is maturing, And the kids that were on video all the time are going to college, or they're going to getting jobs, etc. If you look at that industry, they're also the best rendering companies in the world. They can create the most virtual reality environments better than anybody else, and they're already set for that. When you look at their distribution at any moment in time, you can have 50, 60, 100,000 people playing the same game at the same time globally, crossing all borders. So what we've been looking at is the creation of virtual reality offices, where instead of going into a facility, you simply put on your headset, and now you're inside of that facility, and you can interact directly with people on a fully rendered basis, beyond the old style avatar structures that we see. And what that means is, when you talk about central business districts and major markets, take Manhattan as an example. Across the bridge, office space in Brooklyn's a lot cheaper, but it's a lot nicer in Manhattan until you put on your headset. Now my office in Brooklyn's the same as if I was in the Lipstick Building overlooking Central Park. Okay, and I've got a 2,000-foot office with my own conference room in it, et cetera. Well, I can create all of that with technology now, and with Microsoft's new HoloLens technology, I can actually just invite people directly into my office to meet with them physically, even though they're not there. So when you think of that, then you think of real estate and you think of investment. If that comes to play, which we think about 2023 it will start, that's when we'll be starting with it at least. The repurposing of commercial real estate is going to be massive. And the repurposing of that commercial real estate is going to radically change the way that cities are managed. And it could have a huge impact on residential costs going down, and the way transportation moves around, et cetera. So as we look at flexible workspace, ultimately, having that capability is, again, the next advancement in technology that we'll see that will have a major impact on commercial real estate. Virtual reality officing instead of physical officing.
Do you have any sense of how that'll affect valuations? I mean, I'm just thinking, if people don't necessarily need to be in a space,
it's going to have an effect. It's going to impact valuations, primarily in the highest density markets first, because that's where the biggest costs are, and that's where the migration will be from. And what you'll also have is density compression. If I have a nice office in a high quality building, it's going to be 300 to 600 square feet.
Right.
But in this environment, I can be in a relatively small cube with a headset and a pair of haptic gloves on, and I'm done.
Wow.
Okay, so I don't need to have an equal quality office. Now, will I still want to go to an office? Sure. I want to go to lunch with my buddies. I want to go work out after work, or I want to go get a beer or something. So I'm still going to want to be with other human beings, but when I'm slipping into my work mode, I'm going to have a different experience. I'll still be with people. It's just going to be, I'm going to be experiencing them differently.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating to think about how, how the future looks like it's going to play out, and compared to the cartoon, the Jetsons, and what we all were presented back when, and how much of it is actually somewhat here, but this virtual thing it's kind of fascinating to think about. So,
well, cool. by 2033, it'll be normal.
Right. No,
it'll be a standard. Just like I had my first video conferencing set in our offices in 1981. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So now it's standard.
Right.
The 80s through the mid 90s, even up to about 2004 or 5, it was sort of a rarity.
You were definitely a trendsetter.
Yeah, we spent more money doing dumb things in front of everybody than I can imagine. Uh, but the technology works. So you have certain early adapters that pioneer stuff and pioneer ways to use the technologies, and then you have the market.
Right.
And usually there's about a 7 to 10 year lag.
Right. Well, but those early adapters are ones that kind of help shape it. If there's not adoption, it won't happen. So.
Well, my dad always told me, he says, pioneers get stuck full of arrows.
Yeah.
So don't be a pioneer. He said, build railroads instead. You'll be off a lot better off.
Right. That's good. Hey, Frank, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. As I mentioned to you before, and I think we talked a little bit about risk, but just by day, I'm an insurance broker. And one of the things we do is try and manage risk with our clients. And there's a couple of different strategies we consider when doing so. And the first strategy we look at is, can we avoid the risk?
Mm-hmm.
If we can't avoid it, then we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't avoid nor minimize the risk, then we look to transfer the risk. And that's essentially what an insurance policy is. And I like to ask my guest, and would like to ask you if you can take a second and consider what you consider to be the biggest risk. And just for clarity's sake, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance-related answer.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, if you're willing, Frank Cottle, I'd like to ask you, what is the biggest risk?
Well, in our business, which functionally is commercial real estate, I think it's cyclicality, getting caught on the wrong side of the cycle. And you've seen a lot of property investors overall, and market timing is always crucial. So cyclicality is probably the biggest risk, and the protection from that comes with debt management. You can deal with cycles much more effectively if you have a prudent debt management program. So that comes back to what we were talking about with leasehold liabilities being a part of that cyclicality exposure, not just of physical buildings that you own. And the debt cycle of flexible workspace as opposed to a fixed workspace where you have a fixed lease versus a service agreement is the most effective way to manage the cyclicality in real estate and the cyclicality in business.
No, that's interesting. Well, and definitely, I think the debt and the cycle thing is something that we all should be aware of, and clearly, if you forgot the lessons of the last cycle, you'll get a chance to learn them
the hard way in many cases. In many cases.
Yeah, exactly. So, Frank, where can the listeners go if they'd like to connect or learn more?
A couple places. First would be alliancevirtualoffices.com. Alliancevirtualoffices.com. That's one of our primary sites overall. And if you want to just learn more about our industry, we also manage a publication called allwork.space. And allwork.space is by far the largest focused publication on flexible workplace sector. We have 2.5 million people on social media reach and about 100,000 articles read a month and that sort of thing. So it's a very active publication that we do as a service. It's not it's an unintentional nonprofit. But we do publish that as a service to the industry and just in general so that people can learn more about flexible work and all the things that are involved with it.
Got it. I will be sure to list that in the show notes for our listeners. And Frank, I want to say thanks for taking the time to talk. I've enjoyed it, learned a lot, and hope we can do it again soon.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, Thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.
You're listening to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals. For more information on this or any of our guests, like us on Facebook, CREPN Radio.